you really have to know the toxic people in your life, and you have to know them and decide whether or not those people can be in your life. Are they worth it? Is that relationship worth it, trying to make it better? Because some toxic people like could be our family. It's a lot harder to cut off your family if they're toxic than it is a friend or a coworker. So you have to understand, like, who is this toxic person, and am I able to cut them off? Cutting toxic people out is the last resort. And I want to start with that because I do think, depending on the relationship, you can make it better. There's things that you can do to make it better. And especially if they're like a family member who you have to see all the time, or, you know, they're your parent, or they're your brother or sister, like, those people are a little bit harder to cut off because you're stuck with them for the rest of your life. So learning how to navigate that is important, because some people you just can't easily cut off. You can't easily just like burn that bridge, because they're still going to be part of your life. You have to interact with them, and you want to make sure that that interaction is not terrible. So cutting, and that's why I want to start with the first point of how to deal with toxic people. That's why I want to start with the first point of how to deal with toxic people is to cut them off, because you can. Like, I think a lot of people, especially people pleasers, we don't think we can cut them off. We think we have to keep talking to this person. We think that we have to keep making amends with them, but sometimes it's just not meant to be, and you can completely cut them off. And cut them off could be slowly you fade that relationship away, or you completely just don't answer their texts, their emails, their phone calls, however they're trying to communicate with you. You just don't have any form of communication. That is cutting them off. You can verbalize it to them. You can say, hey, I don't think this is going to work out. I'm sorry, blah, blah, blah. And then you just kind of go your separate ways, however mature, however you want to be with that. But I do think you have to consider the option of cutting them off. So, okay, so now that we've talked about that, got that out of the way, how do you actually deal with toxic people, especially if they're people that you have to see every day, like your coworkers, your boss, your parents, your siblings? You know, how do you deal with toxic people? I think the biggest thing is that you have to know yourself. You have to be in a healthy place. Like, you have to be healthy, because it's a lot easier to be triggered, aggravated, and to really get in a bad mental space when it comes to toxic people, because you are not good. So like, people can only trigger something when there's something to trigger. If someone is toxic and they're triggering you, what are they triggering? You need to work on that part. You need to be doing your journals. You need to be having your therapy sessions. You need to be doing your walks. Like, what are you doing to self-care? What are you doing to take care of you, so that someone who's toxic can come in? You already have that boundary. You already have that shelter. You already have that bubble. You have these things that take care of you. So whatever that person does, it's not going to affect you as much, because you know yourself. You know that you can't be influenced by their behavior. You know that whatever they say, it's not going to bother you, because you know who you are. You know where you stand. One of us wants to start by talking to that person, setting the boundary, and like really doing a lot of that like confrontation type of things before we actually look on the inside and say, I need to protect me first. I need to make sure that I'm good before I go and confront this person. Before I start something with them, I need to be good. Because if you confront them and you're not there, and they say something or they do something that you don't know how to protect yourself, or something that completely throws you off, then how are you going to be able to make sure that you're good? Along the lines with that is that when you are growing, because you are becoming more mature, becoming more confident and adamant about who you are able to not be influenced by their toxicity. Because sometimes toxic people influence you, and you mirroring their behavior, you start acting like them, or it becomes like a tit for tat where they're toxic, you're toxic back. Because honestly, that's not the point of us. Like, as a mature woman, I'm not entertaining that, right? I'm not entertaining their toxicity. I'm not entertaining anything. I'm not sitting here, trying to get them back, or whatever toxic thing they're doing. Like, that's not being mature. Mature is minding my business, is making sure that I'm good, and making sure that the world around me is good. So the things is that if you don't know yourself, if you're not confident in who you are, toxic people can pull you into their toxicity, because you don't know you don't know what you're about. So that's why it really is so important that you know you take care of you first. You do the work that you need to do inside, so that on the outside you're ready to go. And when people come, the toxicity come, it's not even going to bother you. So the next way to deal with toxic people is to set boundaries, because you know who you are, because you know what you're about, you know your values. You're able to know those boundaries. You cannot set a boundary that you don't know. You have to know what your boundaries are. You have to know like how far you can tolerate things, how much is too much. You have to know that. So that's why you need to start with knowing who you are, working on you, focusing on that work. And then you can set the boundary. And with toxic people, a lot of the times it's hard to set those boundaries with them, especially if they're parents or siblings or whoever, because they're so used to you just letting them do the toxic behavior, letting them be that person. So when it comes to setting the boundary, this might take a while. This might take a while for them to really recognize what you're doing, because they may not even know that it's a boundary. They might just think you're being too harsh, or you're not listening, or you're being too much. They will interpret it any other way except for what it is, a healthy boundary. You have to be firm in you, because they will push back on the boundary that you're about to set. In order for you to set healthy boundaries, you have to know what the boundary is. You have to communicate it with that person, and then also you have to communicate what will happen if they cross that boundary. So a lot of us just want to say, like, please don't do this, but like, what happens if they do it? You have to communicate what will happen. Let's say you're setting a boundary with a parent, and they always call you. Like, they always call you at any point, any given day. They call you, and then if you don't answer, they make you feel bad for not calling back, or blah blah blah. So a boundary you can set and say, hey dad, mom, aunt, whoever, call me past 6 p.m. I will not answer because I'm going to bed. Like, the boundary is, do not call me past 6 p.m. like, point blank, period. And then what will happen is I will not answer. That's how you'd set a boundary, because one, you communicated it, do not call me past this time. And then two is like, if you do call me, I will not answer. The next step in that is you actually have to stick to that boundary. A lot of people, especially who are close to us, things become toxic is because we tolerated that toxicity so much. We haven't really put our foot down and saying no more. So now part of setting a boundary is actually following through with that. If your parent, your friend, whoever calls past the time that you said they can't call, don't answer the phone. You won't answer, because you've already set that boundary and they already know that you communicated. And you have to stay consistent with it, right? We do not want to enable the toxic behavior because it's affecting us. For them, they just think it's another day. Make sure you communicate the boundary. Make sure you say what will happen if they cross the boundary. And then also make sure you stay consistent in actually enforcing the boundary and enforcing the consequence. The third way for you to deal with toxic people is distance. Distance is an amazing thing for you to have, because one, it gives you room to really see how toxic that environment is. Because when you pull yourself out of that environment, away from that person, you're able to see. Because when you're in the middle, when you're in the eye of the storm, it's sometimes very hard to see if it is, because we normalize toxic things. We normalize it. But when you're pulled out of it and you've distanced yourself, you're able to see it, and you're able to really judge and make clear decisions of how you're going to deal with that person, that situation, and also how you're going to set the boundaries. Because if you're in it and it's your norm, you're not going to know that this is bad. A really good way is to distance yourself, whether it's for a few hours a day. Let's say you have a roommate that's getting toxic and you guys have to be home together all the time. Maybe you're not being around when they're around a lot. Maybe you just create a distance where you're not seeing them enough so that you can have that space to yourself. Maybe you can just be in your room for a certain amount of time so that you're not around them, so that you're not around their toxicity and their negativity, whatever that is. And maybe, you're at a point in your life where you're ready to get out of that toxic environment. Maybe you're ready to move out. Maybe you're ready to move states, like whatever that thing is. Distance really does help because it gives you a new perspective. Distance could be on an emotional level. You can emotionally distance yourself from somebody so that you're not around that. You can emotionally distance yourself if that's what you need. Maybe the toxicity is emotionally. It's an emotional toxicity where, it's just you're codependent. Well, maybe you're not sitting there listening to their life story. You're not sitting there listening to their trauma all the time. Maybe you're not sitting there being the person that comforts that person, and you're not their rock anymore. Maybe you pull away a little bit emotionally. Maybe the relationship needs to turn to be a little bit more surfacey than deeper so that you can breathe. Because a lot of us don't think about emotional distance. We don't think that we can distance ourselves emotionally. I mean, it goes both ways, in a good or bad way. You can find a way to emotionally distance yourself from a situation. Maybe this is a friend that has become really emotionally toxic, where all you do is talk about their trauma. All you do is carry them through things. It's all just negative, and it's emotionally weighing on you. Maybe what you can do is start pulling a little bit, because a lot of us, when it comes to emotional toxicity, is that we have a savior complex. I save this person from from their own emotions. We want to make it better. So we start, listening and advising and giving and all that stuff. And then it's just weighing on us. It's becoming toxic on our mental health because it's a lot. Like that's not your job. You're not meant to be that solely person. You're not meant to be the friend, the therapist, the coach, all this to one person. You're not meant to do all that. So it becomes toxic. So the way to do this is maybe not asking the deeper questions. Maybe saying, they want to sit and go for coffee. Maybe, every time you go for coffee, you end up like, literally trying to save this person emotionally. Maybe saying, you know what? No, I'm not free. Let's try another time. Maybe distancing the amount of times you have to sit and like really dive deep into this person so that you don't get overwhelmed. There's nothing wrong with listening and being in that with your friend. That's one of my favorite things about my friends is we get to sit and talk about the big things, but it's like we're not doing it every single time we hang out. We do other things, because there's more to life than that. And we don't become each other's saviors because we're not meant to save each other. And we're not meant to do that. We're just meant to support, love each other, be there for each other, not judge each other. And it becomes toxic when you become that person's rock. You become the person's savior and the person's therapist and the person's this. You can't be that person for everyone. Distancing yourself emotionally, create an emotional boundary, create a physical boundary with that person so that you can just have a little bit of room to breathe. That's all I have for you, my friend. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to our lovely growing community, and I'll see you in the next one, my friend. Bye.